Luke and Penelope had been married for 3 years, sharing a modest flat on the outskirts of the city. Both had stable jobs, but their personalities couldn't have been more different. Luke was a homebody, content with the quiet routine of work and grocery runs, while Penelope was always chasing new experiences, constantly on the move. At first, Luke made an effort to keep up with his wife's energetic lifestyle, meeting her halfway. But as time passed, it became clear that people don't easily change their nature. His preference for staying in and avoiding social events grew more pronounced. During their first year of marriage, Penelope repeatedly encouraged him to attend social gatherings, convinced he would enjoy them if he just gave them a chance. But eventually, she realized it was pointless. Instead of urging him to come along, she simply informed him of her plans and left him to decide for himself. One weekend, feeling restless, Penelope planned an outing with her friends. They had no fixed agenda, but decided to start at a cafe. She casually mentioned it to Luke before leaving. Later that night, around midnight, Luke called her. She answered in an upbeat tone, but the noise in the background made it clear she was no longer at the cafe. She had moved on to a nightclub, drawn by the excitement of the dance floor. Luke tensed. He had never been to a nightclub himself, but he knew the reputation they had. Places where people often sought fleeting connections. Trying to mask his concern, he asked if she planned to return, subtly hinting at what he thought was an appropriate time. But Penelope dismissed his concerns, saying she would stay another hour. When Luke offered to pick her up, she refused, claiming she still had energy left. Eventually, exhaustion overtook him, and he dozed off on the living room couch. When he awoke in the middle of the night with a stiff neck, he was startled to find that Penelope still wasn't home. He called again, no answer. Half an hour later, she finally returned. Despite his unease, Luke refrained from confronting her. Before he could say anything, Penelope apologized, explaining she had lost track of time. She brushed past him, heading straight to bed. The next morning, Luke woke early, while Penelope lay beside him, looking peaceful, a faint smile gracing her lips. It was as if she were lost in a pleasant dream. When she finally stirred, he hesitated before asking, "Did I say anything in my sleep?" Penelope smiled softly and shook her head. "I don't think so," she replied. "Why?" Luke chuckled. "No reason. Just curious." He let it go. His temperament was not one for grudges, and by then his mind had already wandered elsewhere, to something far more exciting. "So, when are we heading to the beach?" he asked, his tone lighthearted. Penelope's grin widened. They had been planning this trip for months. She had always preferred luxurious, all-inclusive vacations, which had driven Luke to save diligently. He had envisioned their grand escape, imagining it as a much-needed break for them both. What he didn't realize was that those savings were about to be spent on something else entirely. Over the following week, Luke noticed a change in Penelope's behavior. Her phone constantly buzzed with messages, which she would dismiss quickly. At first, he brushed it off, but as it continued, he grew suspicious. Occasionally, he glanced at her phone, only to find nothing. It was as if she had gone out of her way to erase any trace of her conversations. By Friday evening, Penelope was preparing for another night out with her friends. Luke didn't object, but this time he had his own plans. He decided to follow her. As expected, her first stop was a nightclub, where she and her friends breezed in without hesitation. Luke arrived shortly after, blending into the crowd, keeping a careful eye on her. She laughed, sipped cocktails, and chatted animatedly. Everything seemed normal at first, but as the night wore on, the drinks flowed, and soon they made their way to the dance floor. Luke observed closely. Penelope danced with ease, unlike one of her friends, who was provocatively moving with a stranger. Luke frowned, discreetly recording the scene on his phone. Then, something unexpected happened. A group of performers took to a makeshift platform. At first, Luke assumed they were just dancers, but as the performance began, he realized it was far more suggestive than he had anticipated. The crowd erupted with excitement. Men admired the women, while the women focused on one particular figure, a muscular man wearing sunglasses. Luke's stomach tightened as he noticed Penelope's expression. She was captivated. It had been a long time since she had looked at him like that. As the performance ended, she leaned toward her friends, whispering something that made them shriek with delight. Then, rising from her seat with a grin, she walked away, heading toward the backstage area. Luke's breath hitched. He watched as she disappeared behind the door, her friends cheering her on, determined to uncover the truth. Luke turned his attention to Lillian, one of Penelope's closest friends. When she got out to go to the restroom, he intercepted her. "Lillian," he said firmly, blocking her path. Startled, she froze. "I can only imagine the excuses you're about to make," Luke continued, his voice unervingly calm. Without another word, he pulled out his phone and played the video he had recorded. Penelope laughing, dancing, and engaging with a stranger in a way that made his stomach churn. Lillian's expression shifted to one of panic. She met that dancer before, she admitted hesitantly, and there were sparks. Luke remained silent, his grip on the phone tightening. I thought you would tell you yourself," Lillian stammered. "I'm sorry." Luke's chest felt heavy. He should have been furious, but instead, he just felt numb. He had suspected, but now he knew. He left without another word. Back at the apartment, he wasted no time. He gathered his belongings, threw them into his car, and left. He couldn't stand to be in that place anymore, surrounded by memories of a person he no longer recognized. The money he had saved for their dream vacation, it turned out to be the perfect escape, but not in the way he had planned. By the time Penelope tried to reach him, it was too late. She attempted to paint the situation as a misunderstanding, but Luke had already made his decision. He filed for divorce. Lillian never told Penelope that she had confessed everything to Luke, but Penelope never felt the need to justify herself either. When Luke sent the video to her brother Nathan, the response was immediate. Nathan kicked her out of his house. With nowhere else to go, Penelope moved in with Lillian. She continued her nightlife habits, chasing fleeting moments of excitement. But over time, the thrill began to fade. Finding something real in a nightclub was nearly impossible. Yet she kept searching. For what exactly, even she wasn't sure.